I'm setting it to go live right now, so we will be live when this is done loading. Takes a couple seconds. Okay. So we are live in the voting members group. This is Ask Me Anything with Brian Carroll. And there is a 15-second delay. And so if you click on the Zoom link, you will be able to join us in real time and be able to ask us questions in the Zoom app, which is going to be better. I mean, you could put questions, I suppose, in the Facebook group, and if things are slow in the webinar, I will refer to that Facebook group and relay the questions to Brian. But I think it's going to be a whole lot easier if we do it the other way. So let me do this. Okay. Yeah, so we have some viewers that are in the Facebook Live. Let's see who they are. Oh, sorry. No, stop. Oh boy.
I clicked on chat. Was that a mistake?
No. Is in the Zoom window?
Yeah.
Oh no, we got Joe and we have Kyle Prest. Okay, so no, we're good. So all right, guys. Joe and Kyle, you guys are with Brian. You can click on your Q&A button for, if you're in Zoom, you should be able to type out a question, and then Brian and I will both be able to see that question, and so he can answer them, when you're ready. So Kyle, I see your chat thing. I think it's just easier if you do the question and answer button so that we can keep track of questions that are answered. And maybe you can even take them in order. I'm not sure how that shows up, if that makes sense. But my day has been great, Kyle, just to answer that question. Brian?
Oh, yeah. Well, I slept most of the day. We flew to England on Tuesday, and in the process, we basically lost a night and didn't get much sleep. And we entertained grandkids Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, ran pretty hard. And so today our bodies said, sleep, sleep.
All right. So what do we have here? There's a question.
All right, my first question, and this is this from Kyle?
It is.
My first question is, as such, what policies would you enact to lower poverty rates in inner cities? Well, first of all, you have to have some policies that work directly on jobs. And then you have to work on some things that lower the misery level, even if people don't have jobs. So you want to have good healthcare, you want to have good water, you want to have clean air, you want to have safe streets, those kinds of things that tend to be worse in areas of poverty. When I ran for Congress last year, there were 2 zip codes in my district that were only 12 miles apart. And in one, the life expectancy was 84. And in the other, the life expectancy was 68. So that's not just individual families, that's a whole area of the city that needs a lot of help in a lot of ways. I'm still learning the process here, guys.
So I can say that question, does that complete your answer to that?
Yes, should I raise my
So,
phone screen? I'm done.
So I clicked answered live. If there's a follow-up, people can ask follow-ups, or we're waiting for other questions. For anyone who just joined, so Zeb has joined, thanks. Let's see if there's a new question here. No, that's still the same question. So on the bottom of your Zoom window, you should see a Q&A button. Feel free to press that button and type in a question. I'm looking. Okay, so since we're still waiting for someone to type a question, this is from Tai Chi in Facebook Live. Says, hello, Brian. As a career educator, what do you think is the number one political lesson which you think you can teach America?
All right, the middle of that question cut out. Could you repeat it?
Oh, sorry. It says, as a career educator, what do you think is the number one political lesson which you think you can teach America?
Well, I think you have to start with the value of every person. And that has to come from the top. We have not seen that from our current president. But any kid that comes into my classroom needs to be treated the same way any other student in the classroom is treated, no matter what kinds of background or skills they bring. Everybody's important. Everybody deserves the human dignity that a good teacher gives to every student. And a good politician has to treat people the same way. All right, so I'll raise my hand and say, I think I'm done with that question, unless there's a follow-up.
Okay.
Let me add while we're waiting for another question.
Sure.
I've taught in a lot of different situations. I taught right after I got my credential. I was a substitute teacher, basically in San Gabriel Valley, east of LA. And that's an area with a lot of minorities, a lot of, that time there was a lot of gang activity. I don't know if it's still there. And then I moved to Central California, to a very rural agricultural area. Some of my families had marched with Cesar Chavez. And it was at a period of transition where the families that had moved in during the migration in the 1930s from Oklahoma and Arkansas were being replaced by families that had moved in from Mexico. So it was a very different situation. Then I went to South America and taught on a mission center for 9 years. And those were families that had lots and lots of education. A lot of the parents had multiple masters or PhDs. They were involved in Bible translation and a lot of very intellectual things. And so the whole climate of the community was that way. And then I came back to California. And again, I was in public schools with similar client, not different community, but the similar population that the earlier one had, rural, migrant workers, a lot of them. And then I went to, for 2 years, I was at a Christian school, private Christian school. And then I came back to the same community where I started my career. And I worked with a lot of different kinds of people. Sometimes you set stricter goals when you know that the kids come with higher skills to start with. But you never go wrong with treating people with respect. And this, I think the same thing is true in politics.
Okay. Very good. So we actually have a new question.
Mm-hmm.
This is from Joe from the chat. I'm going to test out if the Q&A is not working, but we'll take questions from the chat. It's not a big deal. So this is, what is your take on the mass shootings, and what would you do as president to respond to it?
I think most people can agree that it's really complex causes. And anyone that thinks we can solve it with just attacking one area, I think is not going to be successful. There is the rush to blame video games, and I think that's part of it. There's a rush to blame family breakdown. I think that's a big part of it. Absent fathers is a part of it. The ease of getting weapons that are extremely destructive is a part of it. I'm in England right now, and in England, where there are no guns, we still have people who go wild and kill people with knives and things, but you don't have the kinds of numbers that you have with our killings. The one that was in Dayton, I think, from the first shot to the end of it, I think was 30 seconds. That's horrendous. There will always be people who get unglued, but we need to make sure that their access to those kinds of weapons is reduced. We're never going to completely get rid of murder. And we have to remember that the ones that grab the headlines overlook the fact that the biggest gun killer in the United States is suicide. So numbers wise, we really need to focus more attention on the whole package of healthcare, following up with our veterans that are not adjusting well to civilian life. So it's an enormous big picture, and you have to peck away at it at every possible way, knowing that you're never going to be completely successful. And so you want to be as successful on as many fronts as you can to reduce the likelihood of something like that happening.
All right. So we have a question here. David, you have your hand raised, which is pretty cool. The way I have it set up with the question, the Q&A, instead of having to raise your hand, you can just ask your question, and then they will appear in the Q&A area in the order that they're asked. So we'll call on you. We'll just ask your question if you want to type it there, or you could type it in the chat window. So that's to David Bovee. I see your hand raised there. But the next question in the Q&A is from Kyle Prest. What is your stance on nuclear energy?
I don't believe we are going to solve the energy problem without nuclear. And I happen to be related by marriage to someone who's involved in the newest generation of nuclear generating. They've designed pods that can be replaced on a regular basis, and they don't have the kinds of problems that the older nuclear has had. But the problem, as he explains it, is that all of our regulations are written for the previous generation of nuclear. And so in order for him to actually see his product installed, he has to go to a third world country like Indonesia and install it there, hoping that then everybody else can see how it's working and take it on. But the actual engineering is the smallest part of what he's been having to do because of the regulations that need to be updated. So that's where I would start with nuclear. But yeah, I think we have to go with the new generation, the molten salt reactors, thorium.
All right. The next question is from David. Thanks, David, for figuring out the Q&A. Hello, Brian. What would be your policy toward Iran and the nuclear deal? As a follow-up, what would be your principles for foreign policy in general? So what would be your policy towards Iran and the nuclear deal?
Well, first of all, we have to work hand in hand with our long-term allies. We can't go it alone. We need to be steady. In a place like Iran, it's a lot easier to make mistakes. Failure is a lot easier to achieve than success. Nothing has a 100% chance of being successful because you're dealing with people and you're dealing with a group of people who have their own set of goals, and we cannot master them. We cannot handle them. We have to deal with them with respect. We have to make sure that both our friends and those that we're having difficulties with understand that we respect them as people. Obviously, there are experts who have studied Iran their entire lives in our State Department, and they don't all agree. But I think our biggest mistake under our current president is that he's not listening to those experts. We can have 10 people in the room disagreeing, but if he gets frustrated and just walks out and goes it on his own without advice or help from the experts, that's the most sure way to end up with a disaster.
All right, and then the follow-up is just the principles for foreign policy in general.
Okay. Well, I have spent about 10 years of my adult life outside of the United States. A lot of time in Colombia, some time in Brazil, a total of probably about 6 months in Europe and in Israel, in Turkey, in China, in Uzbekistan. So I have a great deal of experience interacting with people from other cultures. And those are all learning experiences. And first of all, you can't go in, for example, if you look back at Teddy Roosevelt, he had a wonderful domestic policy, breaking up the trust and things, but his foreign policy was basically, I'm doing this because I can do it, and you guys just have to put up with it. That cannot be our policy. We have to have a policy of respecting other people's rights to be different from us and have different goals from us. We don't have a foreign policy, or we shouldn't have a foreign policy that says, in order for me to win, you have to lose. We need to have a policy that says everybody can win. And I think when other countries understand that that's our policy, that we do defend our rights, we don't let people walk on us, but we also don't demand the kinds of things that our country has too often done in the past. We need to back away from that.
Okay, good. Thank you. That was David's question, I believe. So now the next question that's available is from Tai Chi Kuo. Says, in regards to education policy, would your administration intervene to reduce tuition fees and student loan debt for higher education, or leave those costs to the market?
Well, I went through college at a time when, by working summer jobs, by working weekend jobs, my grandmother gave me $25 a week. I was able to graduate from UCLA, not just debt-free, but I had $1,000 in the bank that I used to finance my first trip to Europe. And I would love to see us get back to the point where a student could do that. Part of that is I was able to have a little bit better than minimum wage jobs when I was working. Partly the fees themselves were lower. But I think it needs to be a goal that no one looks at our students as revenue streams. Way back, I spoke to a high school graduating class at their graduation in 1988, and I warned them, don't take on any debt. Get through college without debt. And when students take on debts, they never really get out from under it. When they should be borrowing money to buy their first house, they're still paying off student debt. And there needs to be, if not a completely free education, if we just put a lower limit on the interest that could be charged, so that when people loaned money, banks loaned money to students, it wasn't quite as attractive. When students were paying it back, there need to be lots of programs, serve 2 years in some kind of a national service, and that pays off your loan. There need to be, there's a lot of suggestions out there, and I don't think any one is going to solve the problem. I would love to see our country get to the point where we could say that the university was free. I think students value it a little more if they have to come up with some of it, but it needs to be, the portion that they come up with needs to be very limited.
Let me ask you a follow-up question with that, since I actually also am a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is just something that's off the top, not really off the top of my head. I've discussed this with a lot of my fellow teachers in my area.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things is that the college education now, is looked at as a requirement for a high-paying job. And even if the job itself doesn't require any of the skill acquired by that college degree.
Right.
And the reason for that from the employers, from research and questioning, is that the college degree is the only way for them to assess the thinking skills, the critical thinking skills, the communication skills, the work ethic of students, because high school, unfortunately, does not necessarily vet those skills like it once did.
Mm-hmm.
And so the discussion we had, and my school just started actually on Thursday. We had Thursday, Friday. So we had some of these discussions about we have this very large divide in my district where we have, over 50% free and reduced lunch, but then a large chunk of our students are from very, very high wealth professional families. And so because those students exist, the school culture is everyone has to take AP classes, right? Or dual credit classes with the local community college. And the great push is college, the second the kids come in as freshmen, where many of those freshmen and sophomores are working, as 15-year-olds to support their families, where, a really intensive curriculum course load is just really not in their cards. So you get this forced dichotomy because we're demanding college, but at the same time, we have so many kids that can't even do high school, in the rigors of high school because they're working, and there's an economic divide. So one of the things that we discussed was, what about, having, like, actually trying to find ways to make the free high school that we offer pretty much universally more effective, right? So that once again, our employers will look at a high school graduation certificate or a diploma and respect it. So that this massive cost, and I think that would also bring the cost of college in line when these colleges can't just charge whatever they want and get paid, because students then will be able to get jobs and not have to be, slave to college.
Well, I think after 42 years of, I was 44 from the time I got my credential. And then of course my own years in school before that, I've seen it go back and forth. And I think nationally we're headed in a good direction right now, at least in California, which does respect the trades more. When I was in junior high, I took wood shop and metal shop and industrial drawing. And we also had print shop. Of course, nobody sets type anymore manually, but those kinds of things were being taught. And then what happened in California was we had a leader in the state assembly whose own experience had been that when he tried to enroll in algebra in high school or junior high, I'm not sure when, the counselor looked at him and said because he was a person of color, he should go into the trades, and gave him shop classes. And so when he had the power to make algebra a requirement in California and to kill the shop classes, he did. And so we went through a period of time when they boarded up the shop rooms or turned them into something else, and everybody took algebra. And my wife was an algebra teacher, algebra and geometry. And she realized that there were kids who simply, that was not their skill set. And now we've gone back, at least in the schools that I'm familiar with in California, and we've started to add shop classes. My little district, I have taught in a city of about 10,000 people, and they just finished a beautiful, putting up at the high school, beautiful new shop building, all kinds of stuff. And this last year I took a tour of the local community college, and all kinds of hands-on skills. They build a portable house every year. The students build a portable house and sell it to support the program. I was amazed at the metal shop. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. We need to continue that. We need our students to know that they can actually walk out the door from high school and get jobs with various unionized groups of plumbers and groups like that have some training programs that can make them some pretty good money. And so I think we're moving in the right direction. We just need to encourage that.
All right, good. So the next question is from S. Grady. I believe there should be a graduated system for food stamps and other government subsidies. Can such a thing exist without too much red tape?
That's a good question. I think everybody would like to see programs that have less red tape. And I have, my whole career was in teaching, and the part I hated the most was the paperwork. But even right now, I'm going through the process of going off of my teacher's health insurance and onto Medicare, and the paperwork there is horrendous. The paperwork for income tax is horrendous. And I haven't seen a lot of good suggestions made. I think one of our national problems with healthcare is that our patchwork system causes so much extra paperwork. I saw a study that said if we could just unify the system so that we didn't have so much duplicated paperwork and so many extra tests and so many different bureaucratic things, then we could save $360 billion a year just on the paperwork part. I don't know if there are similar things we can do in some of the other areas, but yeah, anything that can be done. Part of the problem, I think, specifically with food stamps, is we are so worried that somebody might get an undeserved food stamp that we need to hire a bunch of people at $100,000 a year to check them. And I would have to look at the numbers, but what if we just said, you know what, we're a little bit less concerned about somebody getting some food stamps they don't deserve, but we're more concerned about everybody having something to eat. And perhaps in the process, we could save some money and some bureaucracy.
All right, thank you. I'm gonna go to, that question's done. It seems like there was a little technical difficulty there. I was looking at the live feed and it seems like while you were talking, it was just me in the video. So I hope people could hear on Facebook Live what was going on. I feel like the webinar people might have been okay. All right, so the next question comes from Matthew Bartko. Happy birthday, Matthew Bartko. Anyone else? Whose birthday it isn't, but I know it's Matthew's birthday. I saw that. So Matthew says, I would like to see education funded federally, but administered locally. Do you think such a policy would be better than what we do now?
I would agree with Matthew. I think that if we have funding centralized, it's going to be a little bit more fair. Everybody gets, I've been in a very poor school district, and we got federal funding for several years. My salary was specifically tied to a program to reduce class sizes. And so as long as we had that program, my money came straight, or the source of it was federal. And I appreciated that very much. I think it was a good way to work things. Otherwise, you're going to have pockets that simply don't have the local money to run a school system. And I was in that kind of a district. I think local control is the goal. You have some control come down from the state and some control from counties and some control locally. And between them, they kind of balance each other out. Keep anybody from making mistakes too horribly bad. And no matter what level you're at, there are going to be some bad decisions that are made. And you do want to be able to have somebody in a position to step in and correct those. Yeah. Happy birthday, Matthew.
All right, thanks. All right, so then next question is from William Campbell. He says, immigration is a big issue to tackle. Where do you begin?
Well, I think you begin by going back and trying to correct mistakes that were made 30 years ago, when we started having a lot of people who came in without documents, and they have been good citizens while they've been here. They've had to live their whole lives in fear of being deported. I have had a lot of students in my classes that were great kids, and we put a lot of effort into educating them. I'm thinking right off the top of my head of two students who were valedictorians of their classes. They went on to prestigious universities, public universities here in California. The state of California has invested an enormous amount of money educating two really good kids, and yet they are in constant fear of being deported. And so we need to go back, the DACA, the DREAM, we have to start by correcting past mistakes and making all of those kids, many of them, of course, now are young adults, but making sure that all of them are on a path to citizenship. So that's before we do anything else. We do need to have a system of knowing who's coming into our country. And so we need to put the emphasis on employers. We need to have I realize now here's a national ID card. The Republicans would like to see it for their purposes, and the Democrats don't want to see it for their purposes. But I think it is the solution to a number of our problems. I think if we had one, we would be able to, first of all, assure everybody that nobody is voting who shouldn't be. Secondly, that people, when they go for a job, are here legally, but we do need to make sure that we've expanded the pool of the number of people who are here legally. But we don't want to create a class of people or tolerate a class of people who are here but have to hide. We want everybody to be able to come out in the open and say, hey, I'm here. And we don't have that system now. But we need to get that system in there. And then we need to have control over who is coming into the country. Most of the illegal, the people who are here without documents, came in on visas and overstayed their visit. And you know, a wall is not going to change that. But yeah, we need to first of all make people who are here and have been good citizens or good members of the community, give them a path to full citizenship. And then we need to have a better system of knowing who's here.
Okay. Thank you. All right, next, Kyle Prest has a question. One of the big things right now is government price caps for insulin. How would you go about lowering medical costs in America? Do you think it should be done in a free market way, or would you use government means?
Well, I think when we look at free market, it has failed. The reason that so many of our medicines are so much higher, the pharmaceutical industry is doing price gouging. And so when that happens, it's an appropriate government role to step in and see that it doesn't happen.
Okay, and so that's done. Now this is from Marianne. You can see this, right, Brian? Because it's a long question.
It's a long one, but I'll read along with you.
Okay. So Marianne says the convention delegates are using the 2016 platform as a baseline. I prefer the 2017 platform planks with respect to economics, and am concerned about an overly radical move economically. In the 2016 platform, it says, we propose to shift the burden of property taxes from buildings and improvements to ground rents. Ground rents refers to money you pay as a leaseholder for use of land one doesn't own. What is your opinion regarding the role of private property, including ownership of land in our country? Would you agree with a shift in moving from private ownership of land to state ownership / or control of land?
I prefer private ownership, but there is a problem when we have hoarding. And I think we have land hoarding when some individuals get so much. For instance, here in California, pretty much the whole of southern San Joaquin Valley, all the agricultural land along the west side, is one company, and they are so big that they have had an outsized influence on politics in the whole state. And so I think there need to be efforts, not revolutionary efforts. We're not talking about changing things overnight, but we need to move in the direction of more people being able to own land. I think when people own land, they take better care of it. But when it is hoarded by a few, they tend to take their land for granted oftentimes. I think we need to encourage small farmers. We need to do the kind of things, sometimes that can be done with tax law. I don't want to see land confiscation, not the kind of thing that we've seen in some of the socialist communist countries. That I don't want it to come to that. But we do have policies, ability to create some policies that could encourage the large land blocks over a course of a generation or two in the direction of breaking them up into smaller holdings.
Okay, thank you. We're going back to the birthday boy here. Matthew Barco says, I have heard that climate change is an existential threat. What would you do in your first 90 days in office to address this issue?
It is. It's not just a national emergency, it's an international emergency. And maybe the first thing would be to fly 535 legislators from Washington, D.C. To areas of Honduras where people have had 10 out of the last 12 crops failed because of the drought. And that, of course, is one of the reasons that you've got such a bad situation there and people are trying to escape and they're at our borders. Or, take them to places around the world that are already much worse off. I mean, we've had some hurricanes, we've had some California fires, we've had more tornadoes, we've had a lot of other things that are freaks or would seem to be freaks, but have now become the new normal. But there are other parts of the world, something like this always affects people first who are already at the margins, the people who have the least to fall back on. And I think the first thing is, in the first 90 days, of course, a president is appointing a cabinet. And that would be critical. You make a statement by the people you choose. Our current president has made a statement that he doesn't think it's real. He appointed people who have spent their lives fighting against the idea that it was real. And so the first thing a president does is he stands up at his inaugural speech and says, hey guys, this is real. It's an emergency. We have to make some radical changes. And sure, there are some executive orders that he can sign. You get the right people and say, okay, what do we do here? What do we sign? Right now, we've had a really good bill. the word escapes me, but it's the carbon fee and dividends proposal that has been on the table. Several have been on the table for several years. There's one in Congress now. I think it's HR 763. That's a critical step forward, and it would require Congress to pass it. But the president doesn't have to wait till his first 90 days. The president, election night, as part of his victory speech, can say, I would like this Congress to pass this bill tomorrow. And that would be a giant step forward.
All right, I closed that one out. Let's see here. Anybody put anything in the chat? People, I think, figured out the Q&A system, so that's good. There are no current questions. I'm looking at all the different places where there could be questions. I have some questions I think I want to personally hear from the presidential candidates. So the first question that I have is, how comfortable are you promoting and defending the general concept of Christian democracy?
Well, the first problem, of course, is the term tends to confuse people. If we can figure out a way to get around that problem, I like the idea of Christian democracy, and I think I can argue in favor of it. I wish we had a slightly different vocabulary to use in doing it.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been considering that because, part of my role in the past has been to curate our Facebook page. And so sometimes make mention to Christian democracy, and you'll get people that will come out with the usual, is this some kind of fascist, religious state you're trying to create and so forth. And, one of the things I think, and you as a history teacher, I think would appreciate this, is that there's value in history, and there's value in words. And that when we say Christian democracy, to me, it's not to negate other religions, but it's to historically remind Christians now of what the faith meant with regards to the state, and so those ideas, personalism, subsidiarity, solidarity, sphere sovereignty, like those words are difficult words. They do need repeated definition a lot, but they have so much power. And I think that, when we look at the two major parties and how they've, I'll say stolen Christians to both sides, that to make that claim, to remind Christians, and then even people of other faiths, because that's our commonality. Most faiths would take those principles that are not, revealed, not divinely revealed principles, but universal concepts, and remind them that those can't be parsed into different subsets of policy. You can't take one party can't take some of it and the other party takes another of it and say that now you have to choose. We shouldn't have to choose. And no person of goodwill in any religion or not should have to choose, which way they want to go. So I think you're right. I mean, that word, that as soon as they hear that word, people shut off. But I think people hear a lot of words and shut off, as we've seen with John Maydai's discussion on distributism, immediately, oh, that means socialism. It's like, well, if you're not going to think, I think that's where a lot of people are at. And your students, my students are the same way, where if I say something and you're immediately like, this is too hard, that's kind of where we're at in American politics. And I think we have an ability here to change some of that conversation in the direction we want it to go to. Oh, we got two more questions. All right, here we go. This will be fun.
Let me add one more thing before we move on.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
When I evaluate my own skill set, I think one of the areas where I am strongest is taking some other, a wonk someplace has written something very complicated and I don't tend to do that kind of thing, but I look at what they've written or what they are saying, and my ability is more in the area of re-saying it in a way that the ordinary person who is not a wonk can understand it and grapple with it. And so I think that's one of the things that being called for in this is to try and explain it in ways that people who have not spent 10 years studying it carefully can still understand. All right, next question.
All right, that's great. All right, so this one comes from Kyle Prest again. Where do you stand on hemp and or marijuana legislation? The latter being for either medical or recreational use and or recreational use.
Well, I think that what is most important in that area is education, public education of the fact that the marijuana is not healthy, especially for young brains. We've tried prohibition of alcohol, and it was not successful. We have filled up our prisons with people on marijuana convictions that were probably way out of proportion with what they had done. Even the Prohibition Party is saying less that they want to outlaw things, but that they want to have better education on things. There's some scary stuff out there on especially young people using marijuana while their brains are still forming. And so we don't want to just say, all right, this is good for everybody and let's go for it. We definitely still want to have the idea that this is a dangerous substance, especially used by people who are under the age of 25. It causes some permanent brain damage. But the focus should be on punishing those who are pushing it, those of who are outside the legal system. Here in California, we have, even after we've basically legalized it, we still have a large illegal market. I don't think we've solved our marijuana problems here. And so it's again, it's going to be one of those problems where we have to admit we are never going to totally get rid of the problem. It's going to be a problem that we have to manage on a day-to-day basis. Parallel, when I first started teaching in the place I just retired from in the late 70s, there was a horrible problem with tobacco. You know, at recess, I'd walk into the boys' room and there would be, well, first of all, there would be somebody standing watch at the door. And as I come walking around the corner, there'd be a warning. And by the time I got in there, there were 25 kids who had just flushed their cigarettes. When I came back to the same school 30 years later, there was no tobacco. It was gone. And there was some occasional, we'd find somebody with some marijuana. But I think the education program managed to convince enough kids that it wasn't good for them, that they gave it up. And I think we can do similar kinds of things with the marijuana.
All right. Thank you. And let's say that was Kyle. Okay, so Matthew, should abortions be criminalized? If yes, who should be punished and how when abortions occur?
Okay, I think what Matthew is asking there is whether we should be criminally punishing the mother who's had an abortion. And I don't. I think the doctors should be certainly loss of license, perhaps prison time. The clinics, I think one area where the Trump administration has done some good stuff is the recent, and it was done with executive orders, I think, or from within the bureaucracy, separating the actual abortion facility from the I'm a little unclear exactly what it was separated away from, but the business end of it and the recommendation section of it was moved out of the same facility. And I think that's been a good step. And so you can have sanctions against the business, you can have sanctions against the doctors who perform it. But I think a woman who has gone through it has already been traumatized. And whether they deny it or not, excuse me, whether they deny it or not, I think they carry that trauma with them wherever, excuse me.
All right, well, there are no standing questions. And I know you said you were feeling a little under the weather. I mean, do you want to wait a little bit, Brian, for more questions, or we can? It's been an hour. I think it's pretty.
You got another question?
Yeah. Do we have
another question? You said you had some.
Well, yeah. I mean, mine were more at this point, just kind of trying to bring out your personality and your background. You shared a lot of that, especially in the educational field. You told us that you're in Europe visiting family. I think you have 2 daughters over there. Is that right?
No, actually, I have a daughter in Denver and a daughter in Phoenix.
Oh, okay.
I have 3 sons. The oldest one is teaching at a seminary in Brazil. My middle son, who happens to be passing through London right now, has his PhD in linguistics. Actually, when I told him that we were going to be meeting on Zoom, he kiddingly said bad, because Zoom is their chief competitor. He works for Cisco, creating a competitive product, and Zoom is their number one.
Oh, well, if you give it to us for free, we'll use it, whatever it is. I mean, a whole different story. That'll be a side conversation.
Yeah, he was in a conference in Italy, so he's passing through, and he's here in London for 2 or 3 days with his wife. And then I have a son who lives here in London and teaches anthropology at University College London. So it's the 2 sons that are here that we're visiting, and 3 grandkids.
Oh, that's great. Okay, so Matthew's going to kind of a follow-up question, I suppose. Should there be any circumstances under which abortion should be permitted?
Well, there are some definitions, different definitions here. For example, there are those who say a tubal ligation is an abortion, and I don't think that's appropriate. I think in a situation where the baby can't proceed, the pregnancy can't proceed normally, and there's no chance for a good outlet, but there is a chance for serious medical problems for the mother, I don't consider that to be an abortion. I don't believe that most of what is considered to be a medically required abortion, especially later on, the doctors that I've heard speak to that convince me that probably it's way overused, and there just aren't that many situations where a mother's health is at stake, or her life is at stake. I don't think that the typical ones are rape, incest, and the mother's health. And so I think, at least in later stages of pregnancy, the mother's health is not that big of a question. And I think we have enough successes in saving. Just recently, they went in and did a surgery on a fetus with spinal bifida, and that was success. We're at a point where the number that would even be discussed in a question like that are so small. And I think the hardest one then becomes the rape and incest. And I think the most important thing there would be to create a system where there is maybe like an ombudsman kind of thing, so that there is a court set up, a legal system set up, where the evidence can be presented in front of a judge. Why? Looking at, if you have a 10-year-old mother, there will always be difficult cases. There will always be difficult cases. And so having a hard and fast line, I think if there was good counseling, if mothers had an idea that they would be successful with either raising the child or turning it over for adoption, I think a lot of mothers would prefer it that way. I think a lot of mothers are coerced into abortions by family members or boyfriends or others. And if we can make it more friendly, more user-friendly for the mother to get good, sound counseling, I think a lot of mothers will choose not to have the abortion. And we can pass all the laws we want. Every country that I know of says murder is illegal, and yet every country that I know of has murders. So there will always be people who go ahead and break the law anyway. But you want to make a system that gives mothers every reason not to have the abortion. And that's the goal.
All right, so once again, so Matthew says he can go on all day, so I can stop asking questions when I'm ready. Again, I'll leave that to you. I mean, we've done it for an hour. He has another question for you, and he can do this all day. Is his claim? So
I actually have several hours in the car scheduled with Matthew, one-on-one.
Oh, that's right.
Other people in the car. But in a couple of weeks, Matthew will have all the opportunity to ask me. We're actually sharing a room at the Ohio conference. But I'll answer this one more question.
Okay.
About the universal basic income.
Yes.
And I think as we transition into a time when machines are doing more and more of the work, and there's less and less employment available in some of the traditional industries, it's something to look at. I'm not completely convinced that it solves all the problems. One of the things about the carbon fee and dividend is that it would, in effect, be set a not a livable level, but it would be every person in the United States, I think it's defined maybe a citizen. I'm not sure if people who are here on visas, green cards and things would be qualified under the current bills, but give everybody, I believe the figure was about $4,000 a year per person. So a family of 4 would be getting $16,000 a year. Now that's not designed to be a basic income, but it kind of looks like it. It serves a lot of the same function, and it will allow us to kind of watch how people use it, how that affects the economy. Stockton, California is experimenting with one. We can watch that experiment. I think the idea shows enough promise that it's worth following up and investigating. But I have not reached any hard, fast conclusions yet.
All right. Well, thank you, Brian, for joining us today for this Q&A. With the Ask Me Anything session here. So I think if people, this will be on Facebook Live in that voting members. You've recorded it. So, you have that available. I will probably pull it off of, or maybe you could share it with me in a Google Drive. And
I will have to see
where it goes.
Yeah. I do have a button to stop recording. And so when we're done here, I will hit that. And then I will have to see. I won't be able to do it right away.
Oh, that's fine.
I need to go pick up my wife at my son's house. But I will try and figure out where it is.
Okay.
Do with it.
All right. That sounds good. All right. And so thank you so much. Anyone else that's still watching, Joe Schreiner will have an Ask Me Anything tonight at, I think it's 7 p.m. Central Time in the States is when I have it set up for. So 8 p.m. Eastern. Would that be 6 p.m. Pacific? Is that, you guys 2 hours behind us if you were home? I don't know what that is. But 7 p.m. Central Time is when that's going to happen. So, but Brian, I thank you for joining us and enjoy your time with your family.
Amar, thank you very much.
All right.
Good night now.
See everybody later. All right, see you.
Good night for me. It's 9 o'clock here.
Yeah. All right, take care. All right, bye.